Financial Secretary's report adopted. Agreed? Agreed. And I must apologise profusely to the party president that it has taken us so long to reach his point in tonight's proceedings. So the Deputy Leader tells me that we're keeping the good wine until last. Michael D.
Chairman, I'm sure you'll convey to the Standing Orders Committee my deep appreciation for giving me this glamorous time on every occasion. When I'm set in competition with the drinking, which is an occasional peripheral activity of conferences. But I'm glad to be able to tell you, anyway, those of you from Galway, that Galway United have won, defeating Bohemians 3-2. Cohilig is a gwni cor. An geidal sias is minlum queer lesion fear queen folsha queer revision in macar macaliaki nail kelly and tronun sha. Agus radelia luig nail agus toshe simul capim on nascatan o sampla baha agus ober porico conora on the leave winter veder and socialicus agus portunuk dibre sandal counter sha. Sandal counter sha vi en be maguni in socialicus agus in idiok fehis she shocked. Cowrick Porico Conora, le Gilbert Lynch, Siakwana Vukan, the Gunya Marchin Moore MacDonough, a vi gwilted le Poric. In Asian, a goni sandal counter Sean Am, a vi me hain a hosig me le Porchin October and Alia here. Vi en be magoni fiuntashi Dernach and Socialicus, agus Shinnon Foy, agus Toshatova go lo Misha. Gur hogan dol counter seo ceanaracht agus ceanródíocht nig nehéile na rifri néisúile a bhí ag bagartan chun ceartan an duine agus ceartan sivíalta a bhaint amach. Agus tá sin tábhacht agus ma úl agus sin róteán. Camála sin rud atá tábhachtach agus sé sin agus tasníam le seo. Ní rinneach tada mar daoine neasbláig. Gachrod it gino gon am a glach Porco Conora, Fort le Gilbert Lynch, vi sé enam porchin la Tybra. It was in the name of the Labour Party. It is a great pleasure to stand before you here, and I have decided that what I have to say this evening, really to give it the title of Labour, the Real Alternative, towards a political economy based on an inclusive citizenship. I want to say, delegates, comrades and friends, that of course it is an honour to address you as President of the Labour Party, and I am glad that you have been welcomed, all of you, to Galway. And during our conference, over the next couple of days, we will be discussing some positive, real alternatives which Labour proposes in every area of policy. But as we open our conference, I want to outline some significant issues which I feel are being neglected in the political discussion that is now taking place at a time of very great distress for so many people. And that discussion is, I believe, avoiding some fundamental questions of a political, social, economic, and even moral kind, questions that no serious consideration of politics can afford to avoid. I say this conscious of someone half of whose family immigrated before the age of 19. My own father fought for independence, and independence was never delivered. And I came here to Galway in 1960 as a clerk in the SB and had the great privilege to come here eventually to the university and then to be a lecturer here and then to be an academic. Why I have to say this evening is the importance of people using their intellect as well as their will and their passion and their energy to bring about change. Conferences are not just about gathering to exchange speeches, many of which we might have heard before, or even excellent speeches that can motivate you for a while. They have to be about building and achieving and creating an alternative. And everything I have to say this evening is about human agency. Because that's the difference between the left and the right. All the parties of the right will suggest it happens and we can't control it. It's happening all over the world. As if society and economy are on autopilot. But the left, the history of the left, James Connolly's decision is about human agency. Sometimes it is about what you should write, sometimes about what you should say, and sometimes about difficult decisions. Should you, for example, march the citizen army in favour of the struggle for independence or not? But it is all these things. That's why at the end of a conference, there must be such a conviction to combine thought and action and comradeship and solidarity with a decision to make the changes that are required. And political parties and candidates seeking support from the public, seeking either to remain in office, as the present two do, or even to be an alternative, must clearly answer, I believe, some basic questions. Are they in favour of reviving an economic model that has clearly failed? Or are they willing to offer an alternative which recognises the failure of unregulated, speculative capitalism, a failure which has produced so much misery through unemployment and poverty, not just in Ireland, but in Europe and the entire world? Have we the courage to say, that world is over, that paradigm has failed? Have we the courage to oppose them in they saying that paradigm can be revived, should be revived? Today we in Labour then are challenged to campaign for and invite the public to support a real alternative. How we might live as citizens in the future, might exit a time of lost trust, great anger, and a numb realisation too by the public of the consequences of the misplaced loyalty that they gave, the trust that they put in a speculative capitalism based on market fundamentalism and extreme individualism. How often at Labour Party conferences have I quoted Tawney, hoping that one day one of their family, their class would rise, like why do the tadpoles put up with their miserable existence, that one of their number would sprout a jaw and leap to earth and become a frog. That was the thinking, for indeed it was public support. And this has to be said. It was public support for individualist social policy, for speculative financial policy, for growth without substance that brought us to where we are now. And it is important for us to state very clearly, it need not have been so. Labour's policies would have delivered a different Ireland. There was a very clear ideological base to that form of politics which prevailed in the 1980s. Those political parties that advocated market fundamentalism as a sole hegemonic model for the entire world rejected any interventionist role for the state in terms of the regulation of markets, as well as opposing the extension, even in cases the existence, of the most elementary forms of social protection. These political parties began by advocating a version of the minimal state in relation to public investment and social protection. And then they sought to extend the role of the market into every area of social life while calling at the same time for minimum regulation. Charlie McCreevy style, light touch regulation. Yet even now, while even the most conservative critics are driven to admit that market fundamentalism has failed, any admission of responsibility by those who were responsible for promotion and fawning admiration the economic model which has failed is avoided. Neither is there any acceptance of responsibility for the consequences of this policy. At a scholarly level, and we are in a university, there is a desperate and despairing clinging to the assertion of market rationality by right-wing theorists. In speech after speech, it is suggested that the market response must take precedence over any democratic responses to human welfare and need. And this constitutes a real and fundamental difference between the political parties of the right and the policies of Labour and the left. It is a fundamental difference at European level between those who insist on reviving an unaccountable market model and those struggling to build a social economy. At global level, it is at the heart of development theory and practice, where the debate has to move on from the adequacy of aid volumes to the forms of international cooperation that allow models of sufficiency in development that serve indigenous and global responsibility. I repeat, market fundamentalism has been exposed to the degree that it cannot be defended any longer. Yet market rationality and the extension of the market to areas of social provision where it is singularly inappropriate is clung to in health, education, recreation, even arts and culture. This ideological imperative strikes at the very basis of an inclusive citizenship and the solidarity that is implied in the very concept of a citizenship in a republic. Those responsible for holding on to the failed paradigm, to the economics of misery, are not only to be found in the ranks of politics. There were many privileged by access to the media, or who enjoyed academic freedom, who by choosing to remain silent and not question the fundamental assumptions and consequences of what was being imposed also bear a heavy responsibility. Their collaborative scholarship that may have begun with an evasion of critical responsibility went on easily to accept the inevitability of a full capitulation to the suggestion that market rationality is the only rationality, in fact that it was inevitable. No left-wing party can accept that kind of myth-making, that kind of myth retention that is so destructive locally, in a European sense, and globally. This represents the degradation of scholarship and media comment, and in it is revealed a complicit role in the latest immiseration of our times on the part of so many who had so much opportunity and from whom we might have expected so much. Indeed, more controversially, many public figures who now moan about the abandonment of ethics were cheerleaders for the "we're up with the best of them" boast of a decade ago. Remember who they were, coming on television and saying, "We don't have to apologize anymore. We're in the first rank. We're pushing our chests out." And now they moan, "Isn't it a pity we lost our ethics, that we lost the ability to care for each other?" Gross hypocrisy. And but there are exceptions, of course. The members of TASC, who will run a workshop at this conference, as will Labour Youth, they are a significant and valuable group of critical scholars and young people committed to intellectual rigour and emancipatory politics. And every Labour member should read, popularise and campaign on their analysis. Because after all now, in the situation we're in, political economy and its choices, they are the business of us all. We are our own economists, our own social theorists, as we make social change. And members of the public all around us seem now anxious to awake from the nightmare of the assumptions that they took for granted, that greed was good, that property defined your worth, that everybody's turn for the grossest expenditure would come. And the poison of this view of society and the economy which it served infected many of our institutions, education, even culture, all to be evaluated in terms of their usefulness to market demands in the short term. And this utilitarianism of the markets developed as a politics of the right, was sold to the public and the media as some kind of inevitable post-ideological new reality. It is from this that the Irish people must now awaken and move on. As I say, I repeat, we must be our own social theorists, campaigners for the alternative political economy, knowledgeable, informed, courageous, energetic, not afraid to speak, not having that absence of moral courage of which David spoke. We must, I stress, recognise what it is that has failed so as to be able to go on and build the alternative, an alternative which must be one that reintegrates politics, ethics, economics and social policy. And all of this is possible. That is a challenge to which I believe many people will respond. Labour's invitation, which you've heard already this evening, to break away into a new form of political economy. It must be clear, must be heard, must be made again and again, and in every constituency where all of our elected members will always say, I speak as Labour, I speak as Labour, the vision we share. I think if we are to achieve the fullness of what is possible, and thus address not only our own problems, but the global challenges of poverty, climate change, hunger and sustainability, that is how we must approach our life world. But the present disastrous social circumstances in which Ireland now finds itself is also tragically not only experiencing a legacy of deep anti-intellectualism, but also short-term planning and the consequences, as I've said, of a fracture within the social sciences between politics, economics, ethics and philosophy. The public world created in recent decades was one based on consumption. It was a world that installed celebrity as an alternative to creativity. It gave you a kind of a vulgar personalism instead of any great genius. It was something that celebrated that didn't have time for concern or conviction, one that far from lifting all citizens through social protection or generous and imaginative inclusion in the cultural space, it offered a coarse, aggressive form of relationship among consumers, consumers not allowed to be citizens. In such an atmosphere, everything was degraded. Language no longer served a moral purpose. And language politics is always at its lowest ebb when language fails. The current example of that abuse of language is perhaps in the suggestion that when called upon to respond to the current economic circumstances, the suggestion is made that the crisis represents some kind of inevitable visitation from abroad, rather like the Asian flu, or that it constitutes a failure on the part of the public in general. And even the shrewdest commentators and the most well-paid frequently fall into the trap of using a we without the slightest discrimination as to who the participants were in the speculative property bubble. In the fiasco that was the Celtic Tiger, this we, of course, did not include those who are now the victims and are left without jobs, whose public services have been cut, who may even have to lose their homes. And it isn't without pathos, too, that those inured in a culture of evasion use the phrase the politicians, so as to condemn all politicians for the failure of the policies advocated by the politicians of the right. It's rather like, if your editor doesn't like left or right, why not drive in the middle of the road with one eye shut as some kind of moral compass? That is as cowardly as I describe it. If I might offer a further example of an abuse of language in recent decades, even the best of intentions have had to be expressed in a language of evasive reductionism. The discussion on citizenship, for example, became at best a discussion on volunteering. Social solidarity was not to be mentioned. It was replaced by an invitation to volunteering and a type of philanthropy of guilt. The economy as an autonomous system became the disembodied economy of which I have spoken at other conferences, a system of transactions separate from human welfare or agency, and assumed to possess the magic of self-regulating rationality. All of that of which I have referred was based on an ideological position, one that seeks to separate politics from economics, that refuses to see economic policy as instrumental to social policy democratically decided by citizens. But the political system itself is, of course, not beyond reproach. It, as you have heard from Emmett Stagg, leaked many of its functions to non-accountable administrative structures. And the major two political parties within the political system have not stood their ground in seeking the deepening of democracy or the strengthening of democratic institutions. Rather, they have bowed to populist evasion, For example, in fueling the misconceived notions of a public that seeks all of the answers to policy failure and unaccountable bureaucracy in the institutions of representative democracy, while conveniently refusing to accept the consequences of voting for political parties which have policies based on individualism rather than social solidarity. Parties that place market fundamentalism before the social economy and before real citizenship. Our property bubble was not the creation either of real builders or the people who work building houses. It emerged with disastrous consequences as the fruit of speculative land hoarding and irresponsible banking policy. When in 1998 capital gains tax was cut from 40% to 20%, bank lending increased fivefold, and 67% of that went into property. A new house in 1994 cost $73,000. You allow for the rise in wages, the rise in the cost of materials. And in 2007 it should have been $191,000. Instead it was $323,000. The $132,000 was the speculative dividend. So re-establishing political economy as a real scholarly and practical work, as a substitute for forecasting speculative trends, which is what economistics is a challenge that faces not only politicians and political commentators, but the subject of economics itself, all the social sciences. I frankly think, and I've worked for near 25 years in this field, that what has happened, unfortunately, is that good scholarship did not take place, but rather what was offered as a substitute was an evasive and cowardly apologia for the economics and politics of misery, derived from market fundamentalism to which I've referred. I've said we meet in a university, but those of us who come from a certain kind of background, who all walked past the walls first and then saw the walls come down and then went in, the fact of the matter is, should we not be able to use our minds to speak about that form of society which is possible but which is not being delivered to us? And what kind of cowardliness in us stops us from speaking and raging about the alternative that can be created? But then again, in our society as we meet now, there has been a systematic destruction of trust in our major institutions, and that has been calamitous. And it's rarely said, but I want to say it this evening, that that destruction in trust was assisted by the degradation of their profession, by many accountants, auditors, solicitors, those charged with regulation and probity, who did not uphold the ethical standards of their privileged position. And then, as I come to the end of what I have to say, how does the government respond to this? It is all described as a form of turbulence of the markets. Distinguished, bright, well-educated, Cambridge graduate Brian Linehan can stand up and say at the end of 40 hours of debate, you have to realise that there is a turbulence in the markets, which is about as useful as saying it might rain. The fact of the matter, if that seems like that to me, but this is accepted. This is accepted by the experts who speak for you and to you. And I think that I would say this, that using language like that at a time of 430,000 unemployed people is not simply scandalous and irresponsible. It is outrageous. It is a suggestion which Labour rejects. It is a suggestion that Labour rejects and to which we present our own real alternatives. In job creation strategy, the suggestion for a business and investment bank, and in calling for the building of a real inclusive citizenship. Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate in economics, defined democratic participation as the ability to participate in one's society without shame. Now, the loss of one's income through a job reduces not just the material necessities of living, but it changes entirely the form of participation one has in society. And one is condemned, really, to a lesser form of citizenship. And it is very important as we meet this evening to know that in Finland, which had a crisis like ours, the level of unemployment did not fall for a full 5 years after a return to growth had happened, as they came out of economic recession. And that's the political choice to the public. We cannot have 5 years of unemployment, deepened poverty, 5 years of a lesser version of citizenship that reflects a shameful politics without hope. And that is why Labour in government will make job creation its top priority. But I have said that over the years, in different recent years, I've spoken about citizenship. And I want to say again that it is in the definition of citizenship that we clearly encounter a fundamental difference of politics, of the politics of the right and the politics of the left. Labour believes that the right to participate in society should not be simply circumscribed by economic capacity. The public world, public space, public institutions, libraries are all needed even more by those who are unemployed, by the young, by the old. We believe that there is a floor below which no citizen should be allowed to fall, that there is a fundamental solidarity, that we subscribe to, that is not accepted by the two other large right-of-centre parties. We believe that there is a universality of provision which is necessary to achieve real citizenship in health, in housing, in education, in culture, and every other aspect of life. And I believe that any adequate political discourse must be able to forge a language that has meaning in terms of the lives that are at stake in present and future generations. And this requires the reconnection of politics and economics in a meaningful way, in a way that makes the assumptions of the different political projects of the left and the right transparent. Political choice is, I repeat, much more than about changing the personnel. Neither is it merely about greater efficiency or technocratic skill, that we'll be smarter than they are. It is about political beliefs and values that are given practical expression in politics in the short and medium term. So we in the Labour Party must be courageous, confident and informed in declaring where we stand in relation to these issues of equality, justice, solidarity, social protection, and how economic policies underpin these. We stand for a politics that distributes according to the needs of citizens and universal provision. Labour stands for an inclusive citizenship with economic and social policies aimed at the progressive achievement of a just society. So the challenge that now faces us is one of building that real alternative, one that sees the economy as an instrument of social inclusion, of social harmony. And we have to acknowledge new challenges indeed, such as the challenges of intergenerational justice, and that asks us to build sustainability into all our policies. The view of the right and those interests whom it represents is that an adjustment to our present economic circumstances must be made by cutting the minimum wage or reducing the basic payments to unemployed people and their families. At the same time as such views are being canvassed, the present government has given priority to recapitalising the Irish banking system. It suggests that Ireland's international reputation, even in the short term, requires the satisfaction of the most speculative part of the international bond market. It fails to see that emerging from the present economic morass, with increased social protection, an inclusive society, with new forms of work and occupation defined, is what is possible, is more creative, is what would really enhance our reputations with substance. And Labour, I finish by saying this. Lest people think that I speak in the abstract all of the time. Labour has published policies that are capable of immediate implementation. If one wanted to reduce unemployment in the short term, to fill the gaps in missing infrastructure, create demand, is it not silly to suggest that the provision of schools, community facilities, playing fields, hospitals must wait until the reputations of the banks have been restored? At this time, with so many areas of social provision can be met at the lowest cost, with readily available workers, with sites and assets transferred to a state agency with 49% ownership by taxpayers, with tendering prices at their most competitive in decades. The opportunity to provide vital infrastructure is obvious. The economic and social benefits in terms of employment and facilities in every aspect of social policy are obvious. Yet we are told that architects, engineers, construction workers must wait until the government turns from its banking recapitalisation concerns to finally engage with the real economy. Labour rejects this. We see the emergence of such a large number of unemployed people as a policy failure. It is the version of the economy followed by successive Irish governments that has failed, not the people. It is a core value of Labour since its foundation in 1912 that one's work is a crucial part of how one lives one's life. That is why Labour has been the party that has defended the rights of workers in the workplace, of women and children. Work as fundamental means of achieving one's human potential should not be reduced or commodified as a unit in a labour market. So let us hear answers from all the political parties, including those that would do business with us, to these basic questions. Do they accept or reject that speculative form of the economy, divorced from any social responsibility which has failed? Do they seek to revive it? Do they or do they not believe in the achievement of an inclusive citizenship with a new form of social economy and universal access to the requirements of citizenship? At this conference, Labour offers a real alternative. It appeals to the public to join with us in building for a radical new departure, one that is truly different in the version of society, economy and politics it offers. And it is understandable that the public is angry. To deliver a change, however, they must be engaged with the political decisions made in their name. There is no disconnection anymore. We in Labour invite the public to be with us in making this new politics, building a real republican citizenship. Yes, it is possible to build a new economy accepting these values of an inclusive citizenship. Yes, it is possible, even in the short term, to do so much that will have a lasting value, and to do so in a way that combines current income for communities at the same time as it provides vital infrastructure. So Labour, I conclude by saying this is the real alternative. We are not interested in being the new managers of a system that has failed. We invite the public to join with us in building something entirely new, a form of inclusive citizenship based on a creative society, capable of providing in an innovative way forms of economy that serve solidarity and sustainability. And notice that there is nothing immiseratingly materialist about this. It is about creativity and joy and being able to live in communities, achieving what is possible of our human potential. The coming decades must be made the decades of the achievement of this real republican citizenship. Labour, the party of the real alternative, will achieve this, and we invite all our neighbours, our fellow citizens, to be with us in making this change. To have embarked on this alternative politics, that in itself is an achievement we can celebrate as we leave the worst of times behind. Sian Foy Jerim, Don Phobel or Fod, Bílinn san Obertáfacht, Crohiach Shaw, Gona Míle Maithir.